So the great thing of being up in the Bay is that you're surrounded by all these API queers of all ages, right? I mean, you just run into them on the street, right? They might be delivering your pizza. You might see them stocking shelves at Trader Joe's. They're just like everywhere,
Everywhere.
everywhere, everywhere, everywhere.
Hi, how's it going? You're listening to an Asian queer trans person on a podcast. My name is Lin, pronouns they, them, and I'm going to tell you about my breakup story. I've never had the chance to tell everyone about my relationship, how it's changed my life, and why we're even breaking up this year. I should mention that before my 7-year relationship even began, a lot of other folks were involved, so I'll let you hear from them first.
Hi, my name's Amy Sueyoshi. I'm the Dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University. I'm a historian by training, and my specialties are in Asian American history and history of sexuality. I use she or they pronouns. I usually do turn of the century history, which is 1890s to 1920. And I decided to start, doing some oral histories in the early 2000s. At the time, history wasn't super sexy. Very few nonprofits were engaging in historical projects. Very few artists were also using history as a site of inspiration. So I was really skeptical about whether people would want to join me. But, people were excited to do it, which I was surprised about. API queer history is also clearly on the margins in both the history field as well as in Asian American studies. And so, I could scream it from the rooftop, tell lots of people, and most people wouldn't care. They'd be like, yeah, and? So there's a way in which I think that what's more important to me is that for the few people that it did matter, it really mattered. But generally speaking, I feel like the world doesn't care, which is even more reason why we should care, right? If we don't take care of ourselves, then other people aren't going to do it for us. Being a historian, I know that a lot of queer history generally gets lost because queer genders, queer sexualities are stigmatized. And if you're Asian, you probably don't want to talk about it even more. A, because you've probably been socialized to not talk about sexuality because of your ethnicity. And then B, if you were assigned female at birth and socialized as a woman, you probably wouldn't think your life was valuable enough to save anything about it, right? In terms of historical knowledge. You don't have to be the George Washington of gay people. You can just be a regular person. And so I wanted the older Asian lesbians who are still around to save their stuff, to be able to know how to save it, not throw it in the garbage, so that when they passed or when they were ready to give up their materials, we could deposit it at the Historical Society and some younger dyke or younger queer pup could come along and do research on them.
Who is that young queer pup that Amy speaks of? It was me, Lin. That's right, I'm breaking up with an oral history project. It's called Dragon Fruit Project. Amy decided to found Dragon Fruit Project in 2012 as she realized that she was running out of time to document the stories of the people she was in community with. Dragon Fruit Project was a passion project that Amy knew she had to start, and she didn't do it alone. Back to Amy.
Yeah, so I'd like to be very clear that I just literally planted a seed. That was all I did. And A-Pink really just took it to next level. When I first talked to Mona Wong about it, Mona came to me and said, oh, what do you think we should do at A-Pink? And I said, well, I'm just finishing up this oral history project. It's called Dragon Fruit. I don't know, does this sound interesting to you? And then Mona was like, yeah.
FYI, A-Pink stands for API Equality Northern California. Based in the Bay Area, A-Pink is a grassroots community organization that builds transgender, non-binary, and queer Asian and Pacific Islander power. Let's cue some dramatic music. In 2004, A-Pink was started after a massive conservative Chinese Christians rallied in San Francisco's Sunset District. They came together to condemn the LGBTQ community and deny that it was possible to be Asian and queer. As a form of resistance, a group of progressive queer Asians and allies united to form a coalition, then known as API Equality. In 2008, A-Pink was a founding member of the campaign opposing Prop 8, California's anti-same-sex marriage ballot. Fast forward to 2013. Mona Wong.
Hi, my name is Mona Wong, she, her pronouns, and I was the executive director of A-Pink from 2013 to July 2016.
And Tracy Wen.
Hey, I'm Tracy Nguyen, she, her pronouns, and I was the community organizer of A-Pink from 2012 to 2015.
Tracy and Mona were the two lone staff members at A-Pink. That year, marriage equality was passed by the Supreme Court. Wedding bells rang across the country, and institutional funders were like, see ya. Amidst existing conditions of white supremacy, capitalism, the nonprofit industrial complex, and other depressing things, A-Pink was in a place of uncertainty. Not knowing where the organization was headed, or even how much longer A-Pink would be around for, Mona and Tracy decided to take a chance on Dragon Fruit Project. I'll let Mona explain.
Tracy, I feel like you are the person who really made Dragon Fruit Project happen, because I remember like having the meeting with Amy and bringing it back, and you then took the idea and ran with it. I remember at one point I was like, are we sure we want to do this? Like, is this we were in that period where we were trying to figure out what was our programming going to be like, what did we believe that we needed to be doing in that moment and moving forward. And I remember feeling a little skeptical that this would be the thing. And Tracy, in like classic Tracy fashion, was just like, let's just try it and see what happens. And then it became a thing.
What a great team we were. We worked well together. Dragon Fruit Project, I love intergenerational work because I feel that is such a powerful and ridiculously hard thing to do that is really rewarding. And like to this day, like when I think about the work that needs to be done today, there's so much lacking of intergenerational work. And I say that because I just found out that my mom is going to vote for Trump. And so are all my other aunties. And so are all the aunties I organized in nail salon organizing. It's sweeping the Vietnamese community. And, like I'm trying to figure out, like, I want to have a conversation. Like, I'm not trying to swing their vote. Like, I think that's actually not my goal. I want to revisit my intergenerational organizing practices because I haven't connected with my elders in so long, and I haven't connected with my LGBT elders in so long. And there's something about when the work is tough, it's easy for me to go back in my comfort zone because intergenerational work takes so much intentionality. And I think it was healing. Like so many people like saw themselves reflected. So many people like found a mentor in these folks. Like so many older folks like were validating young people, And I think in our culture where there is a hierarchy of age and who gets respected and listened to or not, like I think that is a healing practice for us to practice with our elders what it's like to listen to each other. And that's the essence of what dragon fruit is, like listening to each other's stories. Like we know storytelling is important, but when you do it across generations, I think it elevates our ability to think about liberation.
Liberation. I asked a friend recently because I've been trying to figure out how do I explain what liberation feels like. And she shared this quote with me. It's by Brandon Wint, an Ontario poet and spoken word artist. Brandon writes, "Not queer like gay, queer like escaping definition, queer like some sort of fluidity and limitlessness at once, queer like a freedom too strange to be conquered, queer like the fearlessness to imagine what love can look like and pursue it." Is pursuing queerness similar to pursuing liberation? I can't speak for others, but I think that's what happened for me. When I first got to know about Dragon Fruit Project in 2014, I had just graduated from college and moved back home to the Bay Area. At that time, I found it incredibly difficult to find other people who shared my identities of being Asian, queer, trans, non-binary, and masculine of center. That's a lot. I know. But as someone seeking to forge deeper relationships at a transitional stage of my life, I felt isolated. When my peers talked about envisioning their futures, I always felt stilted, as if I couldn't imagine myself growing old. Coming across Dragon Fruit Project was something that literally redirected my life trajectory and purpose. I sort of compare it to a millennial online dating story. I was on the internet looking up Asian American community organizations to get involved with. I typed in the keywords queer, Asian, social justice, Bay Area. I clicked on the first search result, and the connection was instant. At that moment in time, I was so excited to meet another queer trans Asian in real life, someone who could understand my struggles with gender, sexuality, race, and tell me that I wasn't alone. When I signed up to volunteer, I wasn't just listening to an audio file and typing words onto the screen. I was getting to know someone, who they were, where they came from, and the larger queer trans API community that they were introducing me to. Our lives intersected as I went from reading their story to meeting them in person. Amy's gonna help me explain how that felt.
I can tell you from my perspective that, with one of the folks I interviewed, I had to go shoe shopping with her for an hour before we could chat. She had plantar fascia and her heels were hurting. So we went shoe shopping, got her insoles, and then we started the interview an hour later. And then after that, we obviously we continue to have a relationship, and she makes really good banana cream pies, and so she's in the East Bay, and then sometimes invites me over after she's made a cream pie, and I'll just go over there to pick it up. So I do have to say that I understand sort of both the work of creating intimacy with someone to have them tell you about their oral history. Uh, but I also truly and sincerely feel grateful towards these folks for creating a road for me that's a little easier to walk. And so the stories are both moving, right, in the difficulties that they endured, and also they're rewarding in the ways that I can create a new friendship, a new relationship with someone that feels meaningful, and it's a relationship of gratitude. I'm grateful to them for the kind of world that they've created for me, and clearly they're also they like feeling like they're valued. I think that's been the best part of it. Definitely has been the not just the sharing of stories, but the relationships built upon that in terms of the trust.
Rewarding relationships. This was the best part of being in a relationship with Dragon Fruit Project, because I didn't do this work alone. I was doing it with a dedicated group of people who also believed that QT API history mattered. In the fall of 2014, everything felt new and exciting to me. I was the classic baby gay, and in a year's time, I went from being a volunteer to an intern, and then all of a sudden, I was hired as the community organizer at APINC. It was surreal to take on Tracy's role coordinating the Dragon Fruit Project program. I was the person introducing it to new volunteers and asking them the question, how do you see yourself as part of history? Whew, that was a big question. And it's hard to answer that question myself, because since I transitioned out of my community organizer role in 2018, I've experienced some memory loss. So to help me find some answers, I'm going to turn to my fellow podcast producer and longtime Dragon Fruit Project volunteer, Ralph Leonio Atanasio.
Hi, my name is Ralph, and I use he and they pronouns. I am a queer 1.5 gen Filipinx person who loves to cook for people and hear about their hopes and dreams.
What you're going to hear next is a conversation between me and Ralph. And I asked Ralph, what was his most favorite memory of Dragon Fruit Project?
I think one of the first Dragon Fruit Project interviews I read was Vince's interview, Vince Chrysostomo. And I was an APINC summer organizer in 2017. And I'm pretty sure we were in the cafe area where the couch was on the second floor. And I got to when Vince was talking about his partner then, and this plant story about taking care of the plant. and losing his partner then. And I was crying in the middle of the day. And all my fellow interns were looking at me like, what's happening? Like, I'm just reading. Um, but yeah, I think that was like one of the most emotional interviews I read during that summer. Yeah, and I think that like really grounded me into this whole project.
Okay, why are we breaking up with Dragon Fruit Project? But honestly, this is something that I'm looking forward to. This breakup or this conscious uncoupling. I feel like it's not very simple to explain. Like I can't say it in 2 sentences.
Well, it's like a story. In 2019, early fall, our committee capacity just dropped to a level where we really had to question the work that we've set out for that year. Is this something we can do with this shift in capacity? Because I think at that time we were focused so much on quality control and putting out all these interviews to be accessible to the public. And then we started questioning ourselves. Like, what's the point of onboarding committee members all the time into this work?
Like since I was involved in Dragon Fruit Project around 2014 and then you came on 2017, between those 3 years, a lot of people came in and out of the committee. So we were trying to answer 2 questions at the same time. Is this the most impactful and is this the most sustainable?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think when someone says, "What's so urgent about an oral history project?"
Ooh. I think that speaks to the challenges that we had, though. We want the community to be responsible for this and really show up and make decisions for how this oral history project should continue. Because as a committee, we would like do things and ask ourselves like, is this something that like the like quote community wants? We were trying to nurture this project that was meant to serve so many people and be mindful of people's interests or visions for this project, but we could only hold so much.
Yeah, yeah. How does it feel knowing that the breakup is near?
It feels like a lot of things. I've been with Dragon Fruit for 4 years now, and in those 4 years, because I was also in college, as I associate all this growth in the past 4 years, also with Dragon Fruit. These were pivotal moments for myself. I think Dragon Fruit, like internally, is so transformative, Because for me, when I went into Dragon Fruit, I didn't know how to tap into history and see myself as part of history. Even like my cultural identity, like migrating here when I was 6, it took me till college to really think about my history as connected to this politic and history of like US imperialism in the Philippines, and to get into Dragon Fruit and learn about QTAPI history. And I realized that that could be a history that is connected to me was so transformative, because now when I think about who I am, I'm like, I am more than just like me in the present.
I feel like I get to live through your experience recalling who you were, like when you first started with Dragon Fruit Project, to who you've become. It's like very meta.
So to see Dragon Fruit quote end also means a lot. It deserves to be mourned and also celebrated, because Dragon Fruit did so much for me and also for others. And it's also exciting because I trust that these stories and the work that's gone in for Dragon Fruit is going to live on. We don't know what that might look like yet, but it is an opportunity for us to try. I think this is an opportunity for people to really think about their relationship to oral history and QTAPI history by themselves.
We were going to break up approximately a year ago. There was this whole formal process planned where myself and longtime volunteers were going to host a long-awaited reunion to celebrate our accomplishments, learnings, and reflections. It would have been a really wholesome breakup because we knew that our relationship to Dragonfruit Project wasn't ending. It was simply transitioning. But this was March 2020, and we got interrupted by a pandemic. And so all of this got put on pause, which brings me to why we're here now. It's time to close out this chapter of Dragonfruit Project. For this podcast series, we've re-engaged 30-plus queer trans API community members in dialogue. And together, we'll be reflecting on the history of trans and queer Asian and Pacific Islander organizing, have some juicy conversations about love and connection, and reclaim space for our own healing. So, if you're listening to this podcast, thank you for being here. Whether you've been with us for a while, or if this is your first time listening to this story, I want to thank you for being part of Dragonfruit Project. Dragonfruit Project was one of my firsts. It taught me about being queer and Asian. It showed me that I could survive past the age of 25, even if it was going to be hard. Dragonfruit Project was my introduction to my lifelong journey towards loving myself, loving others, and loving liberation. I'm not sure what's next, but as always, we're figuring it out together. So stay tuned for the Dragonfruit Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Dragonfruit Podcast. We want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are writing, producing, and recording this podcast on stolen, unceded Ohlone land. We want to ask our non-Indigenous listeners to contribute to the Shumi land tax, which goes towards the Sogorea Land Trust work of rematuration of Ohlone people's land. This trailer was made possible by our storytellers Amy Sueyoshi, Mona Wong, and Tracy Wen. Our production is led by podcast planning team Ralph Liano Atanasio, Emlyn, Ankur Patel, Shilpa Rao, Isabella Rustin, and Dorothy Tang. Creative direction was supported by Jasmine Hu and Kyla Chung. And our podcast music is produced by Sax Religious. You can also find our podcast episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and www.apienc.org. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for our first episode on movement work.